Today's daf is daf Tes Zayin, and we're going to start with Omar Mar, which is a few lines down from the top. Hashochet b'muchni. Muchni is some sort of a wheel that's run by water, and he puts his knife somewhere in this wheel, and the wheel turns, and as the wheel turns, if he places the animal and its neck right near the knife, then the knife actually slaughters the animal, and we said that it's kshera. And we're going to ask now a contradiction from a different brisa, ve hasadya shchitosa psula. Now let's understand the second brisa and its logic. Why is this case invalid? So that's based on a Mishnah later on, that the Mishnah says that in order to shecht an animal, the Torah says v'zavachta, you need a direct action, which is called koach gavra, meaning you have to put a force in. But here, in a sense, the knife is being propelled by the wheel that goes around and around. So we understand very well the second brisa. Lo kasha, and the Gemara now differentiates between two categories of wheels. Ha bisarna de pachra, ha bisarna de maya. There's a potter's wheel and there's a water wheel. So when you're dealing with a water wheel, since it's operated by the water itself, what we call the hydro force, it's not your force. And as we said before, based on the Mishnah later on, you need koach gavra, your force, and therefore the second brisa says psula. But the first brisa is talking about a kind of a wheel that's operated manually. So you actually turn the wheel around and around. That's called koach gavra. Ibais ema hava ha besarna demaya. Even if I assume that we're talking about a wheel that's propelled by water, nevertheless, hakoach rishon, hakoach sheni. Now I'm going to offer two different interpretations of this distinction that the Gemara is making. According to one, what's happening is that although the water is propelling the force, because we're talking in both brisos about a water wheel, but nevertheless, there's a difference between koach rishon and koach sheni, meaning, according to this pshat, what we're saying is that as soon as he opens the gate that allows the water to enter into the wheel which circulates the water, immediately it does the shchita. As opposed to a situation where he opens the gate, the water flows, whether it be on the ground or on a table, and therefore he has put one force, but now you need another force because the water has to sort of project and propel the water. And that's called sheni. That's where the second brisa invalidates the shchita. Another way of understanding this Gemara is, where exactly is the animal? If the animal is close by, what we call bekiruv makom, then as soon as he lets the water in, it does the shchita. But if it's berichuk makom, and he may have to bring the animal closer, so that's already a different force. That's already called sheni. Like, for example, the Gemara in Maseches talks about a case where he takes a clump of earth, throws it up at a tree, and it knocks out the dates, the clump of dates from this date tree, and the dates fall on someone's head and kills them. So that's already koch sheni. Why? Because koch rishon, he puts the force into throwing it up, and then there's another force that brings it down. In any event, the Gemara goes on and says that this second answer about koch rishon and koch sheni, skihad Rav Papa, is reflected in Rav Papa's definition of ritzicha. So now we're going to get into the question of whether or not we could put to death a person as a murderer. Haiman de kafse lechavre. So he ties up a person. The ashkel alei bidka demaya umis. And then he opens up a gate such that the water now flows through the gate and sweeps over the person and drowns him. Chayav, in such a case, since it's a koach rishon situation, because the person is right there, the victim who is murdered is right there at the point where the water gets free and drowns him. My timer, gire didei hu diahanibe. When you shoot an arrow at someone, you might say, well, that's not your force. The arrow is killing. But the answer is that the arrow is only propelled by your force, right? When you pull the arrow back, etc. So here too, the water is like his arrow. And even though the water kills the person, but you have, Bekach Rishon, immediately sent the water on the person. Aval Bekach Sheni Groma Bialmahu. Let's say, for example, you tie the person over here, and the Bid Kadamaya, the gate that you open, is here. So the water gets freed, and then it rolls and rolls and rolls until it kills the person. So that's already a second force. That's not considered your force. And I remember we had these questions in the old days when I did my army service, because for Natilas Yadayim, they didn't really have the proper facilities. We were out in wherever we were. So that what you had to do was you had to sort of like remove something that held the water back. And the question was whether that's considered koch rishon or koch sheni. Because in the Natilas Yadayim also you require koch gavra. Yosef Rav Achori de Rav Chia Kami de Rebbe. So we have Rebbe sitting up front. He's giving the shir. Behind him, in the first row, is Rabbi Chia, who's Rebbe's nephew, but very often disagrees with his uncle. And behind Rabbi Chia is Rav, who's the nephew of Rabbi Chia. So I think I made a mistake. I said that Rabbi Chia is the nephew of Rav. I don't know if that's true, but Rav is the nephew of Rabbi Chia. And Yosef Rebbe Ka'omar, Minayin l'shchita shehu b'tolush. In other words, Rebbe is of the opinion, and this was the sugya that we covered yesterday, that you can only fulfill a valid shchita with something that's tolush, that's detached. So let's say first you take the knife of the shchita and you attach it to something, to the wall, then Rebbe would say that's not a valid shchita. Shenemar, and Rebbe quotes a pasuk in order to prove this, because the Torah goes out of its way in the case of the Akedah to say that Vayikach Samacheles Lishchot, that Avram took a knife. A macheles is a knife, and it's detached from the ground. And why did the Torah go out of its way to tell us that when Avram prepared for the Shechita, he took a knife? In order to indicate that Shechita itself requires a knife that's detached. Now, Rav was sitting behind Reb Chia, and he didn't catch what was going on. Amalei Rav Reb Chia Maika Omar. Explain to me what did Rebbe see in this pasuk? Amalei Reb Chia replies, Now, Reb Chia, in Yiddish, we have a phrase "mach mit the hand." When you go like this. So Reb Chia sort of like went like this, like don't even pay any attention to what Rebbe said, because vav dechsiv ha'uftako. The words that came out of Rebbe's mouth are like if you attach a vav to the trunk of a tree and you push it in such a way that the vav now is broken down into smaller pieces, and you can't even read that it was originally a vav. So the Gemara says, wait a minute. How could Reb Chia make so much fun of what Rebbe said? Rebbe based himself on a pasuk. So Reb Chia now says that pasuk is not coming to tell you that shchita is only ksher in something that's tolush, but rather krazi rusei de Avram kamashmalan, that even though Avram was climbing the mountain with Yitzchak, Tahar Moriah for the Akedah, and he certainly could have expected that HaKadosh Baruch Hu would be mezamim something that could be used for a shchita knife, but no, Avram Avinu took along a makoles in order to guarantee that when he got up to the mountain, he would be able to fulfill the mitzvah. So don't derive any conclusion, says Reb Chia, from that pasuk. And this is all Rabbi Chia l'shitaso that we learned on the previous daf, that he holds that you could be shoched a valid shchita with mechubar. Now, when Reb Chia validates shchita with something that's mechubar, that's attached, how far is Reb Chia going? Because there are two cases of mechubar, two categories. One category is where, let's say you take a stone, which is tolush, and then you build a wall of a house out of that stone. It becomes like a brick in a stone. Then that mechubar is what I call a lower level of mechubar, because it once was tolush. So it's tolush ubesof mechubar. Another example of tolush mechubar would be if you have a knife and you attach it to a wall. Now it's mechubar. But in and of itself, originally, it was not mechubar. Then you could have something that's mechubar me'ikaro, that it was originally mechubar. For example, you have a mountain, and let's say you would chisel out a stone from the mountain, from the quarry. That was mechubar from the get-go, in nature. So Omar Rava pshitali, I don't have any doubts that tolush ubesof chibro, that if it was originally tolush, but now it's mechubar, then we have to determine two halachos that are dependent upon this distinction between mechubar and tolush. Shchita is going to be the second one, but the first one is avodas kochavim. Now we're going to have a drasha, and we're going to derive from that drasha that if so-and-so, an idolater, worships a mountain, then that mountain does not become a chefetz of avodah zarah. It's not also b'hana, because it's mechubar. And anything else that's similar to a mountain and is mechubar is mufka, is completely excluded from avodah zarah, and therefore the Omar Mar, so le'inyan avodas kochavim havi tolush. Now this is a great chumrah, because he's saying that even though at this point you attached whatever object you did to something like a wall or part of the house, and therefore right now it's mechubar, and therefore there should be no status of avodah zarah. But no, Rava says pshitali, since now it's mechubar. Since originally it was tolush, therefore it becomes avodah zarah. Now the question is, he worships his house. His house is clearly mechubar. And we're going to derive from a pasuk in just a second that there's no avodah zarah mechubar. Not that there's no isra avodah zarah, but there's no chefta of avodah zarah and isra hana in something that's mechubar. And his house is clearly mechubar. But the answer is, he built his house out of bricks, which were tolush. If you don't agree with me that right now we look at its present state and the house is now attached to the ground and therefore it has a status of mechubar. In other words, that if the house was made of bricks and the bricks originally were tolush, therefore we give it the status of tolush. And then you would come to the conclusion that a mishtachvil beso, since it was originally tolush in bricks, therefore it's mutter. I'm going to tell you no, it's asur. And why is it asur? Because originally it was tolush. And the pasuk says, Eloheim al hehorim. And this is a pasuk in Dvarim Perek Yud Beis, from which we derive the conclusion of Isuri Hanov Avodah Zorah, and it says Al Haharim. And this is reminiscent of a Gemara that we had earlier about the Kusim, that they used to put a dmus of a Yonah or something on top of the mountain, and they worshipped it. That's Avodah Zorah. But V'lo Haharim Elohim. But the mountains themselves do not become Elohim. Notice they don't become Avodah Zorah. So therefore, says Rava, the fact that if you worship your house, I know a lot of people who worship the house, by the way. Anyway, if you worship your house, it becomes also V'toras Avodah Zarah. That itself is proof positive that because it was originally Tolush, it retains its status as Tolush. Now that halacha of Rava will lead to a kula, a leniency with regard to shchita, because shchita requires tolush. Now it's mechuber, he attached the knife to the wall, but nevertheless it was originally tolush. And just like Rava says with regard to Avodah Zarah that the original status determines the status, meaning it's originally tolush and therefore it's tolush. And now the situation of being mechuber is only a temporary situation. It's not real. It's not essential. So to linyan shchita, we're going to take it as a kula, and we're going to validate the shchita of tolush ula b'sof mechubar because it was originally tolush. But now the Gemara wants to know: is there a machlokes with regard to tolush ula b'sof chibro in machshirim? Now, machshirim means that there are 7 liquids. Water is the primary liquid, that if the fruits, or the foodstuff comes in contact with any of these liquids, it's mukshar. Now it's susceptible. If a sheretz falls on it, it's makabel tum. Now, in the case of machshirin, if let's say in nature something gets wet, like rain comes down, dew comes down, then the question becomes, are you satisfied with the results? Let's say you had something that was full of, let's say, fruits that were dirty on the outside, that's some filth on the peel or the outside peel. And now the water coming down from heaven washes away that filth, and you're very happy about that. So even though you didn't actually take the water and pour it onto the food, but nevertheless, once you're satisfied with the fact that the fruits or grains or whatever it might be became wet, that was good for you, that's called ki'itan. Tisnan hakofe ka'ara ala kosel. Now, he takes a bowl and he puts it on top of a wall. Now, what happens is it rains, the rainwater falls into this bowl, and then it bounces off that bowl onto fruit. Would that be considered kiyutan? And therefore it's machshir. It all depends. B'shvil shetudach, if he's interested in washing off this bowl, because it's not clean, so the rainwater is something that he's happy with, then harei zeh b'chiyutan. It's as if he had placed the water onto the fruits. So in other words, your ratzon, your happiness or your state of being pleased with the wetness, it doesn't have to be because you wanted the fruits to get wet, but rather you wanted the rain for another purpose. But the rain bounces off a bowl which is tolush, and therefore that's already considered kiyutan when the water, the rainwater from the bowl, drips down onto the fruits. But bishvil shelo yilke hakosel, if his ratzon is that the bowl that he's putting, wherever he's putting it, will protect the kosel, because apparently the wetness from the rains, if it's very heavy rains, could have an ill effect on the kosel, then eno b'chiyutan. Why? Because now his ratzon is for the rain to be on an object which is mechubar, namely the wall. So again, if he's interested in washing off the basin, and the basin is tolush, that's already kiyutan. He's pleased with the fact that the rainwater hits the bowl. But if he's pleased with the fact that the rainwater cleans off, that the bowl will protect the kosel from the rainwater, then his ultimate goal and the pleasure that he derives here from the rain is on the wall, and the wall is mechuba. So Rava now, having quoted this mission in Machshirin, now finds a contradiction between the Reisha and the Sefer. And this is what we call diyukim sosrim. Hagufa kasha amrit bishvil shetudach harezeh b'chiyutan. If he wants to wash off his plate, his bowl, then that's considered kiyutan. He's happy with the bowl and the rainwater on the bowl. The implication is, habishvil sheyudach hakosel. Let's say, for example, the wall itself is filthy, and he wants the rainwater to rinse off. It's like sometimes your automobile needs a shtifa. It needs to be rinsed off, and you leave it in the heavy rains. So ein zeh b'chiyutan, and the reason for that is because his pleasure in having the rainwater come down is to rinse off the kosel, and the kosel is mechuba. But now let's analyze the Sefer. Hadartani, in the Sefer it says, Bishvil shelo yilke hakosel, if his interest is in putting the plate there in such a way that the rainwater should not damage the kosel, then eno b'chiyutan. Now let's make the following deal. Habishvil sheyudach hakosel, right? Why did the Mishnah in the Sefer only tell me a mixas, a limited chidush, namely that shelo yilke kosel? Mashma that if he wants to protect the kosel from rain, heavy rain that could damage the kosel, then in that case, hareza b'chiyutan, that would certainly be okay. Which logically seems to contradict everything that we've been saying until now, because if he's interested in rinsing off the kosel, like I said, leave out his automobile to be rinsed by the rainwater, then the kosel is mechuba. So how do we reconcile these diyukim sosrim? Rabbi Lazar, tavra. Okay, I don't know what the word tavra means. Tavra I always understood literally means break it up, meaning you're combining two different things that should be broken up. Misha shana zu, lo shana zu. Meaning we have here a machlokas tanoim, even though the Mishnah doesn't quote two different tanoim, but that's, according to Rabbi Loza, how we have to understand the Mishnah. And this is a machlokas between the Reisha of the Mishnah, which was authored by a Tano who considers the wall to be mechubar, and therefore, since the wall right now, even though it's made of bricks and it was originally tolish, is now mechubar, it's attached to the ground, and that gives it the status of mechubar. And therefore, we made the diuk that if he wants to get the rainwater, he's pleased with rainwater in order to clean off the kosel, then it's not kiyutan. Whereas the Sefer is authored by a Tana who holds that since you took these bricks, which weren't in their natural state mechuba, but rather tolish, and you built this wall, the wall has the status of tolish. But Rav Papa Amar, no, kula chadu Tanahu. You don't have to split up the Mishnah and the Reish and the Sefer as being arguing in two Tanoim, but rather ha b'kosel ma'ara, ha b'kosel binyan. Right? You can have a natural wall that exists from Sheshis Me'abreshis. It was part of nature. It's the wall of a cave. But then you could have a kosel binyan, which means you built a wall out of bricks. Now we can understand the Mishnah if we differentiate between these two categories of a wall. Hachi Kamer, this is what the Mishnah is telling us. Hakofe karal hakosel b'shvil shetudach. Harei ze kiyutan, ha b'shvil sheyudach hakosel, ein ze kiyutan. What's the case? B'kosel ma'ora. So we medayik from the Reisha that if he wants to clean off the kosel, it's not kiyutan. And why? Because the kosel has the status of mechubar. And why? Because it's a kosel ma'ora, and the wall of a cave was there from Sheshis Me'abreshis, and therefore it was mechubar from the start. Aval b'kosel binyan. Now we get to the Sefer, where he took bricks and he built a wall, and therefore we medayik from the Sefer the b'shvil shel yilka kosel hu dena b'chiyutan ha b'shvil sheyudach hakosel harei ze b'chiyutan. We medayik that if he wants to rinse off the wall from all the filth on the wall, and therefore the rain he's pleased with the rain, that's considered kiyutan. Why? Because we're talking about a kosel binyan. A kosel binyan, since it was originally tolush, in its original state as bricks, it remains tolush even after he builds the house. Okay. So now we can come to the final conclusion that if something was originally tolush, right, like the case of the bricks of the house, then it's considered tolush. And now we have two different repercussions. First of all, we derive from that it's avodah zarah. So if he worships his house, it has the status of avodah zarah because it was originally bricks. And secondly, we derive the conclusion that if his intention was to rinse off the wall, so the bucket that he put there collects the rain water that drips onto the wall and rinses off the wall, that's considered tolush, and therefore it's a makshir lekabel tumah. He has a pleasing response to the water, the rainwater, and he's happy with it. Boy, Rava now is going to raise another question.